I live in Arkansas, so a lot of my woods come from the forests of Arkansas. And I don't always buy the very best quality of wood because there are very interesting surprises in some of the lower grades. Now this is a piece of walnut, and the premium wood would all be like that, nice and plain, you know, and that's the wood that I'm going to use for the box sides. But you just have to look at the beautiful grain in here and just let your imagination go wild, because it's every bit as beautiful as you can possibly imagine. These little lines right here are spalting lines from the natural decay of the wood. And so all of those things, this wood won't be very good for box sides, but it'll be beautiful for lids or panels or accent features within the box. I'm going to use this bottom part right here, from here down, to make box sides. And you can see how thick that wood is. It's much too thick for making a box. If I made a box out of wood that thick, it would be very clunky and heavy. And it'll be much nicer if I cut it thinner. So resawing involves taking a thick piece of wood and cutting it thin and more appropriate in size and weight and scale to the size of a box that I want. The next step is to join one side flat on the jointer. So I make sure that my width of cut is sufficient. I'm not worried about a little bit of stuff like that because it's going to be planed out anyway. What I'm looking for at this point is just a very nice flat surface to go up against the fence to carry it through the cut. Now you can see that I was starting out with rough lumber. Now not all craftsmen have the opportunity to buy rough lumber or acquire it. You can start out with wood that's already planed. You can start out with wood that already has a flat edge and not have to do the jointer that I just used. Resawing, though, is still an incredible advantage because instead of having to plane everything down to a certain thickness, you can actually make full use of the stock. For example, from this stock that's now about an inch thick, you see, by cutting it down through the middle, I'll actually have material for 2 box sides. I can resaw it over here, and you can see I've got some material for making dividers and using for other parts of the box. I'm going to show you 2 ways to resaw. The first we'll do on the table saw. Now, you know that the blade won't go high enough to cut through that whole thing at once. So I'll measure the thickness of it. It's at 4 3/4 inches. So if I raise the blade, not nearly to its full height, but simply just over the middle of the stock. So that should be about there. The dimensions of this that I have are 1 1/8 inches, so if I cut it right down the middle, I'm going to come close to having 1/2 inch thick box sides. So I'm going to set the table saw so it's just cutting at about 1/2 inch. And notice that I've changed my throat plate so that I've got a splitter in place, which is really the smart way to do it. I'm going to make my cut all the way through it, and then I'm going to flip my stock end for end to finish the cut. Many craftsmen use this technique to develop what they call a book match. And you'll see that these 2 surfaces are very, very closely related in terms of the patterns and the grain inherent in them. Starting at this end, you can see that beautiful pattern. And and you can also mix them up this way for other opportunities in terms of the alignment of the grain. And often, because that saw kerf has been removed, they won't be a perfect match at the exact end, but you can slide them one way or the other and actually achieve a fairly perfect match. My second technique for doing resawing is to use a bandsaw. And the bandsaw can be tuned to make incredibly thin cuts, cutting wood as thin as veneer. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to cut right down through the middle. I have an accessory fence that I've made to go on here that gives a little more support. And you would be able to use your standard fence in place of this. My next step is going to be to plane each side of the stock that I just resawed. Now I have 4 perfectly uniform sized pieces of walnut, all uniform thickness. So I'm going to join one edge of each piece of stock just to make sure before I cut the box parts to their width that we have a nice edge to go up against the table saw fence. I sight down the stock like this. And if you do that, you can see whether it's straight. You can see if there are any variations in the edge. And if there are variations in the edge, then that would tell you that it needs to go back on the jointer for a little bit of correction. Okay, so my last step in preparing this stock for mitering, I'm going to lower the blade a tiny little bit above the height of the stock. I want my box size to be 4.5, so I'm going to move my fence over to 4.5. And now I'll make my cuts. It always helps to make sure that you get all of the edges that you want against the fence lined up in that same direction so that they're ready to cut. And so these are ready for mitering, or they're ready to be cut to length for any kind of box corner treatment you'd like to do.